Hi, this is Nikenty, and also a bit of a format change. It's been a while, huh? But the game has still been on my mind, and the fact that the series has been unfinished weighs heavy. So instead of finishing the Dead Space 2 series as a Let's Play, I just went ahead with playing it and enjoying it. And so here I'm putting my thoughts together on why it's good and interesting, and is, in my opinion, the best entry in the Dead Space series. Dead Space 2 is not a horror game. It's arguable whether Dead Space 1 is, and Dead Space 3 certainly is not, but I'm not particularly interested in either of these arguments. But what is important to recognise, I think, is that Dead Space 2 is a good horror-themed action game. Wait, what does horror-themed mean? Is that meaningfully distinct from a horror game? So, sidebar here. I've often thought about this in the context of a lot of games, and how often this comes into how we think about games and their genres. Often the thematic aspects, the visuals, the story, the tropes, and so on, are what we think a game is in genre terms. And that would usually be where you'd stop with, say, TV or film or books. But games have mechanics. They are things that we actively play and participate in. I would argue that most of the time the mechanics is what matters to understanding the core of the game. The theme is not unimportant, often crucial, but theme alone doesn't tell you what kind of game it is, and is not the only axis of comparison for games. The extended version of this is a topic for another video, but suffice to say that for this example, when I say Dead Space 2 is horror themed, I do not mean to disparage horror games or what Dead Space 2 does in that space, merely to note that the horror is a layer wrapped onto the rather juicy third-person action shooter that it is. And I love both aspects of that in this game. Since I originally wrote this, Jenna Stieber, in a video on a slightly different topic, talked about this concept in a postscript. The link is here if you want to check it out, and in general you should just watch her videos and listen to her podcasts. I think it could be a very valuable tool when discussing games rather than just trying to fit everything into genre. What's good about Dead Space 2 then? For me, it comes down to three core aspects that I'll dive into a little bit. 1, great weapons and monster mechanics. 2, a well-delivered story with a very good, well-considered horror theme. And 3, when you put it all together, a really well-paced game experience with good variety, culminating in one of the most impactful endgame sequences. So, the weapons are fun. They are mostly not guns, though they are sort of basically guns. Yet, in a world where we're often met with the standard sort of pistol, sniper rifle, shotgun, SMG, or assault rifle dynamic, it's nice to have much more unusual weapons. From the plasma cutter, which with upgrades remains one of the most versatile tools throughout the game, to favourites such as the line gun, which takes the legs out from under enemies in hilarious ways, to the javelin gun, which lets you both pin enemies to the wall and electrocute everything around them. You can try to whittle limbs down with a more traditional assault rifle, or use the seeker rifle to simply pump a lot of damage into an enemy from afar, but this is where the other aspect of having guns is turned on its head. It's nothing new by now, with 3 games, and the remake of the first as well, having hammered home cut off their limbs so much. The simple fact remains that you're approaching these enemies in a lot of different ways. A headshot barely slows them down, and center mass shots at best take up a lot of ammo, and at worst release additional enemies for you to deal with. All of the classic Dead Space 1 enemies are back, and we also get the Stalkers, who venture into the zone to collect artifacts. Stalkers who hide behind crates, play peekaboo with Isaac, and choose the absolute worst moments to charge out and headbutt the poor guy, before then scampering off. And they mostly appear in dedicated arenas where there's a lot of hiding places for them to use. They provide, overall, a fun and interesting challenge, even when you're prepared. So, you're shooting guns at enemies, fundamentally, but compared to efforts such as Control, which, despite its setting and story leaning heavily into the weird, unusual, psychological concepts that it explores, basically just gave you a magic pistol, a magic SMG, magic shotgun, and so on, and you just shoot enemies in an arena. Dead Space 2, compared to the first game, speeds up combat a little bit, gives you that wide toolkit, but also throws a lot more enemies at you throughout the game, and just lets you have fun with it. It's rarely much horror, but it is really engaging.
Auxiliary systems booting up.
As for the story, well, everything keeps on going wrong for Isaac, as it did in the first game. First, he wakes up not knowing what year it is, then he's immediately in a necromorph outbreak, and has to deal with the station's administrator trying to stop him, and a fellow lab rat just sort of being there and crazy. He's also seeing images of his wife, who he knows is dead, but continues to haunt him for some reason, which does get explained throughout the game. Isaac's journey through the station is sort of a stumble for survival and trying to work out a way to maybe stop all of this. And so the encounters with the necromorphs are punctuated by little scares from Nicole, revelations about the Church of Unitology, the markers, and then also just some nice character sketches of Isaac and other NPCs. Isaac also talks now, and it was a good move to give Isaac a bit more character, agency, and to offer some great reactions from him on how everything is just going to hell. Isaac's dour determination provides a nice guide to us about the events, and his defiance in the face of whatever the marker has been doing to him is good characterization for an unusual hero. I don't think the writing of the third game quite does Isaac justice, although he doesn't really stray too far out of character. And the remake of the first game keeps him somewhat reserved, even though they add voice acting to him. Here, Isaac loses his cool. He tries to make sense of what's going on, but also shows himself to be resourceful, determined, and ultimately quite likeable. So his constant mishaps and the need to fix everything, mechanical and metaphorical, are nicely arranged into a set of really interesting levels.
Was the purest. I spent years sifting through your demented brain. This is not the way it was supposed to happen.
Well, how was it supposed to happen, Tybin?
And so, putting this all together, for that I'm going to have to go into endgame spoilers. If you haven't played Dead Space 2 at all, you should probably go and do that now. But hopefully the rest is enough to convince you otherwise. And skip to this timestamp to avoid spoilers, which are incoming. The spoilers for the end of the game are about to start. Just be ready, okay? Yeah? Ready? The endgame sequence, from breaking into the government sector onwards, is a brilliant culmination of everything that the game has done well so far. A dramatic story beat has you crash through and open up the gates to let the necromorphs run riot and help you carve a path through the EarthGov troops. Fighting the dregs of that necromorph assault has you put together everything you've learned about the different types of enemies and how to dispatch them. At this point, it should be a somewhat triumphant procession, though not always easy depending on the difficult level, of just putting your knowledge and skill and experience together. And then the next section has the game finally unleash the regenerator type enemy for the game. The, Ubermorph? Names are hard. The game waits until the last moments to add the unkillable enemy into the mix, unlike Dead Space 1 and 3. And what it does is serve to crank up the complexity of your situation up a notch, and in a really great way. You're not dealing with it alone, but in combination with the need to progress and also to defeat other necromorph enemies. Now, truly the game is testing everything you have learned, and at a brisk pace. And it's extremely satisfying to react to all of these different, almost overwhelming pressures. Placed at the end here, it also ties into the story reaching its crescendo, and it just works beautifully. After running the gauntlet with the regenerator and seeing the convergence approaching as the necromorphs gather under the marker, you finally have the revelation of what all the eye stuff throughout the game was, and the steps the Stross was mumbling about. When the game has you then climb into a machine to unlock Isaac's marker-based memories by having the player guide a needle into Isaac's eye. I mean, video games. And then we finally come to the convergence of the story. You confront Administrator Tideman, do a bit of weird but pretty cool quick-time events, and finally get to confront the marker / Nicole construct in your mind to shut down the convergence. It's a really dramatic story event, although given that you faced the real combat challenge just a little bit earlier, this is more of a story moment as a reward where you get to have Isaac defeat his demons. For now, anyway. The story is then wrapped up in a melancholy way as the credits roll. Isaac is surely doomed on this now abandoned, failing, crumbling space station. The sad music plays over the credits as we zoom away from... Psych! All forgot about Ellie and the fact that, like Isaac, she does not give up. We are given a last-second reprieve and turnaround as Isaac's will for survival is reignited and he is rescued by Ellie. And there's just time for one more callback to Dead Space 1 right at the end. This combination of all the game's elements together, even if it does not succeed absolutely perfectly, has everything marching in the same direction and makes the experience fun, interesting and engaging. This is the ultimate triumph of Dead Space 2 for me, and where I don't think either the excellent Dead Space 1 and its remake, or ultimately the very disappointing and messy Dead Space 3 succeed. And neither do many games that work with, or try to work with, similar combinations. Though notably I think the Resident Evil 2 remake is really great for doing a similar thing. So what does this all mean? Well, Dead Space 2 is still worth playing in 2024 if you haven't already. And if you've had a crack at the excellent Dead Space 1 remake, remaster, whatever it is, and enjoyed it, you should definitely check out Dead Space 2. Especially as it looks like Motive won't be given a chance to remaster the second one. And if you have played Dead Space 2 but not given it another whirl since release, or sort of around that time, well, it's worth going back to. Fortunately, it plays nice with modern PCs on Steam, with a few minor tweaks to get mouse acceleration in check. And they are backwards compatible on the newer Xbox consoles. So what's stopping you? Give it a go. It's a great game.